Hello. Welcome back to the Space Gulag. Today we'll find out what would have happened had Anakin trained Caleb Dume. Before we begin, special thanks to our patrons, and if you want to go check out some other things that I do, the podcast is available, the Twitch is streaming on the daily, and go check out the Pride of the Empire and the Broken One merch. There's only one more episode of our Earth series, so go get that while it still lasts. Otherwise, our story begins on Coruscant. Anakin had just returned from a very important mission across the galaxy. It started on Christophsis with a battle against Admiral Trench that was won by Skywalker and Yularen, down to a siege on the ground against General Loathsome, which ended up leading to a chase across the Outer Rim to Teth, where he and the members of the 501st had to rescue Jabba the Hutt's son, securing the hyperspace lanes that were controlled by the Hutts in the Outer Rim. It was a successful use of resources by the Republic. How the Republic didn't have control over the hyperspace routes to begin with was a serious question, but at the very least, they had access to them now, which mattered now. When Anakin got back to the Jedi Temple, he was requested to visit Grandmaster Yoda. Anakin made his way to the Grandmaster's room and entered silently and sat down across from Yoda. The little green Grandmaster asked Skywalker how he was doing, especially with handling the onset of the Clone War. Anakin told Master Yoda that everything was alright. Dealing with the loss of clone troopers was rough, especially since the few months since Geonosis, they'd all gotten close. War does that though. Yoda understood that because he had a short mission to Tordaria not long before with a couple of clone troopers. Yoda was genuinely happy to hear that Skywalker was handling everything well. As he continued, Yoda expressed that he believed Skywalker should take on a student. Anakin was a bit hesitant to this, as he told Master Yoda, with all due respect, that he didn't believe he should be taking on an apprentice during a war. Anakin was especially against this because he had heard reports that Ryloth had been taken over by the Separatists, and because Skywalker's Legion was one of the few successful legions early into the war, he would likely be deployed to deal with Captain Took outside of Ryloth. Anakin was frank with Master Yoda and explained that he didn't believe the battlefront was a place for a Padawan, suggesting that after the war certainly he would consider it, but right now he didn't believe that it would work. Yoda scratched his chin and suggested that Anakin try it. He might be pleasantly surprised by the experience. Anakin looked back at Master Yoda and told him he wouldn't know where to begin. He'd never been an instructor before, and the last thing he wanted to do was fail another Jedi or even get them killed in combat. It was like bringing a child to the front lines of battle. Those two didn't mix well in Skywalker's mind. Yoda nodded his head as he understood where Anakin was coming from. Though Yoda expressed his understanding to Skywalker, he then told Anakin that it would be up to him if he wanted to train the last remaining student of the most recent graduating class. Anakin looked at Yoda with a puzzled expression as he asked what he meant. Yoda continued telling Anakin that there was a young boy who wasn't picked by any Jedi Masters and he needed a teacher. Anakin nodded his head slowly as Yoda continued, saying that Master Balaba took a young Togruta girl named Ahsoka Tano, and the young boy was all that was left. Anakin sighed. He told Master Yoda that he would see Caleb train and he would decide from there. Yoda smiled and told Anakin to come down to the training arena number 29 in the next hour, and a couple of Jedi would be present waiting for him. Anakin nodded his head and bowed towards Master Yoda. He couldn't really believe it. When he left the room, Anakin promised himself that he would be kind to Caleb, but he would deny him. That was his intention. Anakin didn't like the pressure of being a Jedi Master. That was a responsibility he didn't want to think about while dealing with this throughout the entire Clone War. Regardless, an hour or so later, he went down to the training arena and sat down on the seat of bleachers next to his master. Obi-Wan told Anakin that he believed Caleb would make a fine student for Skywalker, but it was just up to him if he wanted the responsibility. Anakin asked Obi-Wan why he didn't just take the student, to which Obi-Wan said he had taught Anakin, and it was time for the legacy to continue through him. The legacy was attached to Anakin now, and he would have to make a fine student for a young boy like Caleb. Anakin would help Caleb expand his horizons much sooner than any other Jedi could. Anakin shook his head and said that sounds like something Obi-Wan would be much better equipped to handle. Obi-Wan put his hand on Anakin's shoulder and told him that it was his turn to be an inspiration. Anakin smirked at Obi-Wan before rolling his eyes and looking over to see a rather nervous boy walk to the center of the room. Anakin noted that Caleb was nervous, and he felt an instant relation to the boy. When Anakin had first joined the Jedi Order, he was the same way, thrown in front of a class to display his skills in front of Jedi Masters he wasn't familiar with. Though Caleb knew the Jedi Masters in front of him, he knew Skywalker, Kenobi, Plo, and Yoda without needing to see or hear their names. Caleb turned around and began the segment, taking his time and going through the exercises quickly and formally. Anakin found it to be positive, and he believed that there was more to Caleb, though he wasn't sure how much of a warrior he was off the bat. And while the boy was a bit rambunctious, he didn't carry the attitude that he would expect from a young boy with him. Depa was currently dealing with the repugnant attitude and sass that Ahsoka carried. One would think she was Kenobi's student because of the wit she had that was faster than lightspeed. Regardless, Anakin sighed. He stood up and told Caleb that he would be taking him as his student, as long as that was alright with the council members present. Anakin turned around and looked at the masters present. Yoda and Plo smiled and nodded their heads as Obi-Wan simply smiled and watched his student finally become a Jedi Master. Skywalker and Caleb walked out of the room, talking with each other. Caleb had to hide his emotions because he was giddy with excitement. He really wanted to be Skywalker's apprentice. Hell, every student wanted to be Anakin's apprentice, because Anakin was just simply awesome. He was the first real victor of the Clone War, and he was the chosen one after all. He was a rebel of the Order, and that made him an absolute inspiration to several of the students ready to become Padawans. Truthfully, Caleb felt a lost hope when Depa Billaba took Ahsoka over him to be her student. Caleb believed that he would have to sit idle waiting for someone to finally choose him. Anakin noticed immediately how uppity Caleb was. Caleb was a true Jedi. He was someone who wouldn't try and break orders, and so Anakin questioned himself internally while talking with Caleb if he was cut out to train a Padawan who had no issues following orders. Maybe there was something he was missing at the moment, but Caleb didn't reflect himself. Maybe that was the point. Anakin didn't reflect Obi-Wan, and Obi-Wan didn't reflect Qui-Gon, in the same respect that Dooku didn't reflect that of Yoda. Each of these students were different from their masters. Anakin and Caleb spent time getting to know each other and understanding how they operated as individuals. Anakin himself wasn't really sure how to become a teacher, and he was completely surprised that he took Caleb so quickly. But the truth is that Anakin saw himself in Caleb, and that he couldn't really help himself. Now he needed to come up with lessons plans for Caleb, though Anakin was being dispatched into the Bith system to maintain a defense fleet. Yularen's flagship was a Jedi cruiser, and the vessel was outfitted with a Jedi training room. And so when Anakin and Caleb entered the Resolute and prepared to depart from Coruscant, they went down to the training room. Skywalker would inform Yularen of what he would be doing for the time being, and Yularen was perfectly fine with that. Yularen was actually very happy about it because he didn't have to deal with Skywalker on the bridge. Yularen had a love-hate relationship with Anakin. While his dealings helped them win in battles, especially over Christophsis, Anakin wasn't exactly a traditional Jedi. Yularen would have preferred a Jedi that wasn't so adventurous or so excited to deal with conflict as Skywalker was, because Anakin made his job as an admiral a lot more difficult. Regardless, Anakin and Caleb went down to the training room inside of the Jedi cruiser as the ship jumped off into hyperspace. Caleb's training was going successfully. He was a well-trained Jedi Padawan, and he listened to instruction very well, but Anakin was concerned. He wasn't concerned for Caleb based off of his current training, but he was worried about Caleb in terms of handling the battlefront, because the front lines were unforgiving, and so were the droids. They cut down clones without remorse, and they showed less mercy to civilians. Anakin watched Caleb and thought about how he would be able to assist his Padawan with preparing for the battlefront. Yularen contacted Anakin once they arrived in the Bith system, because word had it that Master Plo's fleet was destroyed. Anakin was troubled. He knew Plo Koon pretty well, and he would be saddened to hear about his death. Anakin left Caleb down in the training facility while taking in this call. While Caleb was down there, he got himself introduced to some of the members of the 501st, most specifically Captain Rex, the leader of the battalion. Anakin inside the bridge asked if there was confirmation of Master Plo's death, or if it was simply just an assumption. The council members present suggested that they lost contact with Master Plo, but urged him not to depart the Bith system because of its importance and strategy. Anakin looked at the Chancellor, who looked at Anakin, and then back to the council, suggesting that Anakin go to the Abrogado system in his shuttle to see if he could locate the Jedi Master. Masters Windu and Yoda looked at each other before looking back to Skywalker. Anakin told them that he could bring his apprentice along with him and see if they could find Master Plo Koon and save him if he was still alive. The reason for Palpatine forcing Anakin into the field was simply because he believed at this point Dooku and Grievous had pulled the Malevolence away from the Abrogado system, and on another note, he wanted to force Anakin against the will of the Council. Though the Council didn't really have an issue with Skywalker taking a shuttle to the Abrogado system to see if Master Plo was still alive, considering he was one of the leading members of the Jedi Council. Within the corresponding hour, Caleb and Anakin would depart into hyperspace. The entire situation revolving around saving Master Plo would inevitably be successful, but they discovered the Jedi Master mere moments before he was dead. Plo's breathing apparatus allowed him to survive in space for a short period of time, and that short period of time was beginning to expire. But Plo did it because he valued the lives of his clone troopers a lot more than that of the value of himself, and so he sat outside of the vessel so that they had more oxygen to survive with. In the circumstance that he did die. The group would narrowly escape the Malevolence thanks to Skywalker's piloting skills. In the hunt for the Malevolence, which came in the following days, Skywalker and Dume would have more of an opportunity to bond with each other, as they shared a Y-wing bomber in their pursuit of the super weapon. Skywalker would be able to lead a successful strike on the Malevolence, disconnecting the super EMP laser on the weapon and forcing General Grievous to retreat upon the arrival of Obi-Wan Kenobi's fleet. Anakin would learn a lot about Caleb during the entire mission around the Malevolence. While Caleb was a young boy and had tendencies to match that of a young boy, he was very good about listening to orders. He never questioned what his master said, and he believed that Skywalker always had the best intentions at mind when he led them across the galaxy. He never questioned what his master said, and he believed that Skywalker always had the best intentions at mind when he led them across the galaxy. While Anakin and Obi-Wan would be sent to the Malevolence to rescue Padme Amidala, who coincidentally popped out of hyperspace next to the Malevolence because of Palpatine. Nothing suspicious about that. Caleb would stay inside of the Resolute upon its arrival. When the mission was successful, Skywalker and Caleb would take Padme back to Coruscant, where she would be kept safe. It would be here, 3 days before the Republic redeployed a 3-fleet campaign towards Ryloth, where Caleb would make the most of his training. It required Mace Windu, Obi-Wan Kenobi, and Anakin Skywalker's respective fleets, and the entire invasion, or relief effort, was waiting on Master Windu to finish up his current campaign. Anakin with this time made Caleb come to a warehouse on the outskirts of Coruscant. Anakin had a brilliant idea to ensure his student would survive any number of turmoil. Being that Caleb wasn't exactly flexible, he'd begin to work on his flexibility and the ability to utilize his weapons. Anakin brought Caleb into the warehouse, and inside were a number of clone troopers Caleb met, a couple of them inside of the Venator before. Captain Rex, Jesse, Tup, Hardcase, and Kix. It was hard to distinguish which one was which because their Phase 1 armor had very little distinguishable qualities, other than the armor utilized by Captain Rex. Anyways, the men were all lined up in a semicircle with little groups of the clones chatting when Skywalker and his student came back in. When they did, the clones all jolted around, in which Skywalker pushed Caleb into the middle of the circle. Caleb asked his master what he was doing. Anakin informed him that he was going to teach him the key to survival. The key to survival was ensuring that he could handle the most difficult of challenges, and considering the clones equated to more than 100 battle droids by themselves, Caleb would have to survive a circle of some of the best clones instead of the 501st, which arguably was one of the best legions, if not the best legion, of the clone army. Caleb asked Anakin if they were going to shoot him. Anakin laughed it off and told him that they were going to be shooting stun rounds at him. So if Caleb was hit, the chances are that he'd be knocked out by the shot for at least an hour. Caleb readied his weapon and ignited it, and Anakin stopped his movement and instructed the clones to begin. Feet moved ever so slightly, and the sounds of fingers moving across the blasters moved. Caleb's eyes across his body as he deflected the first shot, only to twist around and deflect another. Anakin was impressed thus far, only for a short moment. Not that he thought badly of Caleb to begin with, he was just impressed that Caleb was handling this as well as he was. He'd really come into his own under Skywalker over the last couple of weeks, and he really got comfortable with being Anakin's student. Anakin watched as Caleb backflipped and deflected another shot before turning around and ducking under a shot that narrowly missed Jesse's head. The clones all steadied their shots, and then they moved to a more intense level, firing multiple blasts at the same time, as Caleb swiftly spun around, blocking both before being domed in the face by Jesse. Anakin looked over at Jesse and congratulated him on the shot. Jesse gave an awkward a thumbs up. He didn't really know how to feel about shooting Caleb in the face, especially considering Caleb was technically his commander. Though Caleb was never boisterous about being their commander, and he respected the seniority of those that were around him. Anakin walked over and looked over at Caleb before talking to Rex, referring to Caleb as Kanan. Rex was confused what he meant. Anakin told Rex that in certain aspects of the ancient Jedi language, there were Jedi referred to as Kanans. The meaning was misconstrued a couple times over 1,000 couple years, but the most recent meaning was quiver of blasters. Originally, it was a term that stood for forest and whatnot, but Anakin thought that Caleb fit the name really well, Kanan. While Anakin's standards weren't yet met, Caleb far exceeded any standards he could have set for him. Being able to defend himself so adequately was certainly impressive in Anakin's eyes, though we would have to wait an hour or so to see if Caleb would be able to meet the task of fending off the clones again. While Caleb was talented, he was very humble about his talents, and he had only just begun to explore what his talents could garner for him as Skywalker's student. It would have taken him more time to find these abilities had he studied with Master Balaba. While yes, she was a fine instructor, she would limit him to the code of the Jedi, something she was so frequently doing with her rowdy student in Ahsoka Tano. Caleb eventually awoke, asking how long he was out for, to which Anakin told him an hour and a half. Skywalker told him to get up, as Jesse called out from the other side of the room to apologize to his commander for shooting him in the face. Caleb smiled a little as he crooked his way up. Anakin told him that it was time to go, again. Caleb looked at Anakin and then down at the ground as he picked up his lightsaber. Caleb had some choice words he'd offer in surprise, but he kept them in his head. He wasn't a rebel. He accepted his orders and ignited his lightsaber, as Skywalker again called out the order, and in a much shorter period of time, Caleb was shot down by Tup. The same process would be repeated numerous times in the few days before they had been dispatched to Ryloth. When they got to Ryloth, there was a fleet present, though there was one issue. Captain Tuck of the Separatist Alliance manned a Lucrehawk cruiser. Skywalker was still unsure about how his student's ability to adopt in leadership, and so he left the clones to command the assault. Because of this choice, the Battle of Ryloth wouldn't be a total bust, as Admiral Yularen called for a retreat before the siege could really begin, due to the arrival of 4 extra support ships. Anakin and Yularen realized that they were unprepared for this mission, and because the clones led their own assault, they were able to comply with orders and return back to the fleet with minimal casualties. Caleb, who was on the bridge, watched as Anakin, Yularen, and Captain Rex talked about how they would approach this attack. Caleb stood silently as Anakin told them that there was one way to do this. One of the capital ships was heavily damaged. He and R2 could use that ship as a battering ram to obliterate the Lucrehawk and clear way for the other 2 Venators. Caleb noted that he could participate in the fight and run assistance for the fighters, being that they all needed fighter support until the Venators could take down the 4 Separatist support ships. Anakin thought this to be a sound idea and told Kanan, as he referred to him in front of the troops now, that he would lead the fighters on a counter-strike. Anakin told Yularen to have the other ship abandoned and have all the troops and supplies fill the Resolute and her starboard flagship. Anakin started walking out of the room as Rex and the leading pilot looked down at Caleb and asked what his orders were. Caleb was caught in a momentary surprise as the weight of command fell onto his shoulders immediately. He bit his lip, took a deep breath, and then told them to warm up the engines on every available starfighter. They would need to set up the perimeter around the 2 flagships once they exited hyperspace. Rex got to it immediately, as Caleb looked at Yularen, nodded his head, and then ran after his master. Caleb asked Anakin if he were truly ready for this, to which Anakin informed him that he truly was. There was no doubt in his mind that Kanan could lead this attack. Caleb watched as Anakin made his way down the hallway with a confident smirk written across his face. Caleb felt a hand on his shoulder. It was the pilot, who asked if he was ready. Caleb looked down the hallway at his master, who turned a little bit with a confident grin on his face before turning down an adjacent hallway with his astromech behind him. Caleb smiled and then looked over at the clone pilot and told him that those clankers wouldn't know what hit him. The clone slapped Caleb's back and said that's what he loves to hear. When Skywalker arrived out of hyperspace, he set the trap. His flagship would smash into the Lucrehawk while he and R2 watched the battle from the sideline. Caleb led a near-perfect battle, which would be huge as a motivation boost for him as a leader. The fighter support allowed the 2 Venators to take a heavy-handed battle to the Separatists and defeat them in combat, with little to no issues. The battle over Ryloth would have a serious success to it, as Windu and Kenobi's support fleets arrived, just as Caleb and Yularen finished off the Separatist defense. This would see a new level of confidence rise within Caleb, and inside of Anakin for his student. With Skywalker believing that his somewhat and even sometimes too cautious student could win battles, he was convinced that the 501st would have no issue with being the best. Anakin's fleet would pick up the pieces and the war would continue. Skywalker would help oversee the growth of Caleb, though sometimes Caleb had to play the role of a young Qui-Gon Jinn, when he studied under Dooku, that is. Caleb had to help remind his master from time to time what was and wasn't the Jedi way. Skywalker wasn't exactly orthodox to the method of the Jedi, and Caleb learned that very early on. But there was an incident or two where Caleb believed that Skywalker had gone way too far. He didn't snitch on Anakin or anything, but he tried to stop his master from doing anything bad, which actually helped Anakin in his own respect. It reminded Anakin that he had someone watching his every move, and that he had to be the best version of himself so that he could prove to be an effective teacher for Caleb. On another note, Caleb and Obi-Wan got along really well. Caleb was super excited to interact with Obi-Wan, considering he was the newest addition to the High Council alongside that of Shaak Ti and Kit Fisto. Caleb and Kenobi got along really well because the two of them shared similar beliefs as how the Jedi are to operate. The two of them acted like true Jedi, and they didn't deter from the path of a true Jedi. While this certainly made Anakin stick out, it didn't create a divide between master and apprentice, or between Caleb and Obi-Wan. It just made Anakin remember how different he was because of the difference in upbringing, but it didn't make him value or see his student with any less respect. Throughout the Clone Wars, there'd be several occasions where Caleb would stand the test, especially as Anakin's student. One occasion was when Anakin was badly injured and Caleb spent time with Aayla Secura as they tried to keep him safe. Caleb had a leading endeavor on Felucia that wasn't a total failure because he listened to his master's orders without defiance. Caleb would never allow a little gold droid with questionable attributes to serve alongside him and Skywalker when R2-D2 was lost, and Caleb knew better not to chase down a bounty hunter like Cad Bane when a holocron was stolen. Caleb's respect for his master and ability to weigh caution and responsibility allowed him to fit into Skywalker's scheme perfectly. While yes, Anakin always liked a little pushback, having the little pushback he got from Caleb every so often actually worked really well for the two of them. Anakin even encouraged it from Caleb, but Caleb never went too far with his pushback, because to Caleb, Anakin was his master, and that was a sacred bond for Jedi to have. Kanan, especially as he got older, was able to distinguish when and when not to speak. At the Second Battle of Geonosis, Caleb worked alongside of Jedi Padawan Barriss Offee, who to Kanan's surprise was a year younger than Anakin. The war did take a toll on Caleb though. He wasn't with Depa, and that meant he was on the front lines all the time. Anakin Skywalker and the 501st were the high-success offensive unit that laid down the heat and showed no mercy to the Seppies. That meant they were on every battlefield. The issue is how Anakin and Caleb, as Jedi, would handle the entire ordeal. There were certain trials and tribulations throughout the war that tested the Jedi, like the betrayal of Pong Krell, which happened on a planet far from Umbara. He was executed by the Galactic Marines during a battle that Ki-Adi-Mundi couldn't be present for. Caleb wouldn't partake in the Citadel rescue because of orders to keep him away from the line of danger. Caleb, being himself, understood the orders and accepted it without trying to sneak on to the Citadel mission. As the late window of the war came around, Kanan and Anakin led an assault on the final remaining core world that was under Separatist control. Cato Neimoidia had been a target for the Republic for the longest part of the war, and now the opportunity they had to take it back. Anakin and Kanan were making their way across the planet, using their starfighters to lead an aerial fight against a defense fleet stationed over the floating cities. The two Jedi were making headway until Master Yoda contacted Anakin Skywalker, requesting that he and Kanan return to the Jedi Temple. Anakin understood the order and decided that Kanan was ready enough to lead the entire invasion himself. Instead of taking their foot off the gas, he informed Kanan that he'd be taking full control of the battlefront and leading the Republic on this mission, considering Kanan had great success on Umbara. By this point in the war, Caleb had mounted an unbelievable amount of belief in himself. He had no fear of leading, and he trusted his abilities to be a leader on the battlefield. Skywalker looked out of his starfighter and nodded before whipping his ship to the right and pulling it up into hyperspace as gunships rained down behind Caleb, defended by V-Wings and ARC-170s. When Skywalker returned to Coruscant, he found that someone had bombed the Jedi Temple, and he was requested to investigate the bombing. Because Anakin was the closest Jedi to Coruscant, who wasn't on the planet when the temple was bombed, he was called in for the investigation. The investigation for Skywalker would be rough, but he would enlist the assistance of Jedi Master Tera Sinube for the investigation. Master Sinube, who was once a leading member on the High Council, left the Council so that he could be more of assistance to investigative matters, which were extremely rare, which is why he chose it, so he could take lots of naps. Master Sinube and Skywalker began their own investigation of the temple bombing, while the Jedi oversaw protests outside their temple from the population over the effect the war was having. This wasn't a part of the grand scheme for Palpatine, it was just an added benefit of people seeing a lack of value in the Jedi. Though after 3 weeks of intense investigation, Anakin and Sinube came back to a Jedi, Padawan by the name of Barra Sophie. She would be charged with crimes against the Republic, punishable by execution. She'd be kicked out of the Order and left in the hands of the Republic. This would be troublesome for Kanan, because he and Barriss had become friends ever since the Second Battle of Geonosis. Anakin wasn't looking forward to telling his student about this, because he knew it'd be such a vibe killer, especially because Kanan and the 501st had broken through the defenses at Cato Neimoidia and claimed victory for the Republic. Anakin was ready to call his student a Jedi Knight, but there was no time for that because the two of them were being dispatched from Coruscant to Ringo Vinda to assist Master Tiplar and Tip Lee in their siege against the Separatists. Well, it was more so a defense, but the Republic was making it an offense. The Doom Squad was working hard to make a push, but they truly needed the help of the boys in blue. The Republic was making its way towards total victory, and the Battle of Ringo Vinda was a critical step in that process. Skywalker and Kanan joined the sisters on the battlefront and made an aggressive push on the ground. By this point in his young career, Kanan was a strong young man, with a mindset focused on victory. He led his men with absolute precision and he didn't falter in combat. Kanan split off from the main group of men, while Anakin took the middle route. The clones alongside the 4 Jedi made a quick push into the central zone, where they combated several layers of battle droids. Skywalker was in the middle of the battlefield leading the charge, though one of the troopers from the 501st was acting a bit off, and he took off his helmet. Fives, one of the ARC troopers from the 501st, noticed this as he watched Tup start walking towards Jedi Master Tip Lee. Kanan felt a disturbance, and the only reason he felt it was because of the bond he had with his brothers. All the training he completed with the clones kept him tightly connected to all of them, and he felt this disturbance coming from Tup as he turned around and saw the blaster of the clone aimed at the Jedi Master. Kanan threw the Force as hard as he could, knocking Tup off balance and shooting the shot astray as he fell back, slamming his head into a crate, knocking himself out. Kanan fell backwards as his shoulder was clipped by the stray blaster bolt. Anakin looked over while blocking blaster fire, asking if his student was alright. Kanan looked over to make sure Tup and the general were okay, before looking up at his master and nodding his head. Clone Trooper Kix, the 501st medic, made his way over to Tup and took control of him and dragged him back behind a barrier while the battle pressed forward. Anakin and the other 2 Jedi Masters made their force very felt as they led an aggressive assault. Kanan rose to his feet to contribute to the battle, and so he moved forward, igniting his lightsaber once more to join his fellow Jedi. The Battle of Ringo Vinda would be seen as a catastrophic loss for the Separatists, being that Admiral Trench, who hadn't actually died at the Battle of Christophsis, found his death at the hands of Skywalker as Kanan, Tiplar, and Tip Lee finished off the rest of the advancement against the droid forces. The space battle was an overwhelming success, and the Separatists were driven from Ringo Vinda. Because of the victory, Tup was transported back to Kamino without Fives and without Rex, meaning that the Kaminoans would terminate his life and hide the evidence of the inhibitor chip, though they would pass it off as a rare infection and would create a blank inoculation to send across the galaxy for the clones so that the Jedi didn't think anything of the entire situation. The war raged on. Anakin and Kanan were closer than ever. Kanan had really grown into his own, and he was taking after his master by growing out his hair. Kanan really looked up to Anakin, and it was very evident, but there was still a mutual respect between the two of them. Their relationship was very strong, and Anakin took care of Kanan a little too much. The only issue for Kanan is he basically allowed it because he didn't revolt against Anakin. Kanan obeyed every order that was given and never really resisted unless he felt the actual need to do so. But for Anakin, he genuinely loved his student. Kanan brought him so much joy because he was his student, and he got to see him grow into the young man that he was today. He was a strong young Jedi, and he took a lot after Anakin. Kanan originally drifted towards Form 3 like Master Kenobi, but after spending so much time with his master, he actually dedicated to learning Anakin's form, which was Form 5. The war began to conclude after a successful victory for the Republic at Anaxes, and the recovery of the former ARC trooper Echo, who stayed within the ranks of the 501st instead of joining the Bad Batch, because he was with his brother Fives yet again. Fives and Echo had survived the entire war, and they were not going to risk separation again. Fives, never having gone to Camino from Ringo Vinda with Tup, never lost his mind, nor was he executed by Commander Fox on Coruscant. The Republic was pushing towards victory after Obi-Wan, Kanan, and Anakin claimed another victory in the Outer Rim. It wasn't long after the battle that the Republic was approached by the Mandalorians. Kanan cut the transmission off the moment that Bo-Katan started throwing any shade towards Master Kenobi. Both Kenobi and Skywalker looked at Kanan with shock. Kanan looked at them just with as much shock. He personally couldn't believe that he cut the communication off from his master and Obi-Wan Kenobi. Kanan looked from side to side and simply said she was rude. We don't owe her anything because of her mistakes. Anakin snickered and Obi-Wan turned around and walked towards the viewport of the bridge. Kanan knew most of the entire incident with Mandalore. Of course, he didn't know about Satine, but he knew enough about the situation to infer that the Mandalorians started a civil war all arrogantly, and now they were paying the price for it, and they didn't want to pay the price for their own mistakes. A couple hours later, the entire ship would go into high alert while Anakin and Caleb were sparring. Obi-Wan came running in and informed them that Coruscant was under attack. Kanan and Anakin looked at Obi-Wan as the ship's sirens went into full blast and troopers began running through the hallways. The battle was here. It was the Separatists. They attacked the capital of the Republic and the Jedi needed to act. Kenobi told Anakin that the Chancellor was taken as a hostage. Anakin was ready, especially since this battle could end the war. When they arrived over Coruscant, the hangar bay doors opened up and Anakin led Obi-Wan out of the hangar as Kanan traveled behind them with a wing of fighters. Skywalker led an assault towards Grievous's flagship. The battle was on, and the flak was intense. Yularen was taking up part of the battle map as the Republic was finally recovering its early battle losses, especially as Republic Star Destroyers entered out of hyperspace from the Kuat drive yards. These were very powerful, much larger ships with a lot more firepower than that of the ship with a line called the Venator. The three Jedi cut through the fog of war and made a quick landing into the Invisible Hand. The Jedi knew they needed to find the Chancellor and get him out before the Separatists tried to escape. Anakin and Obi-Wan led the way as Kanan followed up closely behind. Not as closely as he would have liked because they were walking through the hallways as one of the blast doors closed between the three of them, cutting Kanan off from the other two Jedi Masters. He radioed into them telling them that he would catch up to them. Anakin turned around to cut the door open, but three destroyer droids rolled in from around the corners and transformed and opened fire. Anakin and Obi-Wan ignited their lightsabers as they deflected blaster bolts and got inside of an elevator. On the other side of the blast door was Kanan, who turned around and ignited his own lightsaber in the face of two Magna Guards. Kanan fought back and forth, using all of his master's training to attack the Psycho droids. Kanan cut through them with relative ease. Before he could celebrate any victory though, he looked down the hallway and saw General Grievous himself. Kanan knew he couldn't take this fight alone, so he looked for an alternative. He heard Grievous call him Jedi scum as two lightsabers ignited. Kanan looked down the hallway as he then looked around. Grievous laughed as he started speeding down the hallway, twisting his lightsabers in circles. Kanan was trapped, but he was Anakin Skywalker's student. Kanan spun around in a circle, cutting the floor out from underneath him as Grievous threw his blades forward, narrowly missing the Jedi Padawan. Inside the prisoner chamber at the top of the vessel, Obi-Wan and Anakin were beginning their duel with Count Dooku. Kanan could feel it, but he could also see Grievous trailing after him. Kanan looked around and found an elevator shaft. He used the Force to get the elevator shaft door open, only to realize that there wasn't an elevator present. Grievous was on his creepy crawly stance as he chased down Kanan like a psycho cockroach. Kanan turned around and jumped back freely into the elevator shaft, igniting his lightsaber and slamming into the wall, holding his position upright. Kanan knew that he had to get on the move before Grievous got here. Kanan used the Force and his lightsaber to make his way up the elevator shaft as Grievous tried to follow. Though before he could enter the elevator shaft, he was almost taken out by an elevator that had its cords cut. Grievous was furious, but he figured that Dooku would deal with the 3 Jedi as he made his way back to the command bridge. When Kanan got to the top of a ship, he ran into a room. He looked down and saw Obi-Wan under a piece of debris, and dead in front of him, he saw Palpatine encouraging his master to kill Count Dooku. Anakin was trying to tell Palpatine that it wasn't the Jedi way when the words "do it" echoed across the chamber. Dooku was motionless as he looked up at Anakin with shock. Dooku realized he was just a pawn in the grand scale game that Palpatine was playing. Then the words "Master, no" echoed out across the room, and all of Anakin's momentum fell as his arms, that were so close to dragging across Dooku's neck, stopped instantly. Anakin looked over at his apprentice as he ran down the steps and asked what he was doing. That wasn't the Jedi way. Anakin dropped Dooku's lightsaber. Kanan looked at Anakin with a glare, and then he saw the blade of the Sith Lord drop to the ground. He then ran over to where Kenobi was to make sure that Master Obi-Wan was alright. Kanan pulled the debris up, just enough to get Obi-Wan out from under it, and he made sure that the Jedi Master was okay, which he was. Anakin was looking at Dooku, and then his glare turned towards Palpatine. Kanan came back around the corner after making sure Obi-Wan was alright to see his master. Kanan, normally not one for words, snapped. He demanded to know what Anakin was thinking, even referring to his master as Anakin. Skywalker was so taken aback, he hadn't seen such ferocity in his student before. Kanan stormed over telling Anakin that no matter the crimes that Dooku committed, it wasn't the Jedi way just to execute him despite what some politicians said. It pissed off Kanan more that Palpatine was egging Anakin on. Anakin looked over to his student and genuinely apologized, admitting that he should have been better as a role model for him. Kanan looked down at Dooku and asked him if he had anything to say before he was locked away in prison for the rest of his life. Dooku looked over at Sidious, whose yellow eyes glared at him. Dooku's mind flashed back to the eyes of Yaddle that looked up at him as if to beg for mercy. He remembered the lack of mercy Sidious showed to Maul, and now only after feeling as if he was playing the game correctly did he realize that he was only just a piece in the puzzle. He had no longevity. Everything Palpatine promised for the last decade was just to get himself the power he needed to take over the galaxy and throw everyone else under the table. Dooku knew that nothing would be worth it if Palpatine took over the galaxy. Dooku told them that Palpatine was the Dark Lord of the Sith behind the Clone Wars. Both Jedi looked at Palpatine before looking back at Dooku as if he'd lost his mind. Dooku professed, telling them everything he could, doing anything he could to expose Sidious right here and right now. The Sith Lord sat quietly, and then Dooku told Anakin that it was Palpatine who ordered him to have his mother taken by the Tusken Raiders and killed. Anakin's eyes must have turned red because the entire room fell silent on those words. Anakin looked at Dooku, gripping his lightsaber harder. Palpatine could feel it. He was on the edge of his seat with his cuffs still on, as he wondered what Anakin would do next. It was true. Palpatine had Dooku force the Tusken Raiders to kidnap Skywalker's mom. Palpatine then put the visions of her death into his mind to keep Padme even further away from the Senate than she was on Naboo and to push Anakin further into darkness. Skywalker looked down at Dooku and then he turned his attention towards Palpatine. Kanan ignited his lightsaber and looked at Sidious, asking if this was true. The politician asked the young Jedi if he would simply believe a corrupt Sith who was trying a last-ditch effort to survive. Anakin was so put off by his mother's death that he couldn't decide who to listen to. He thought Dooku was lying, but then out of the corner of his eye, he saw Kanan raise his lightsaber to Palpatine as he demanded the truth after seeing the yellow tint in Palpatine's eyes for the first time. Sidious growled, unlatching his shackles and shooting lightning into Kanan, sending him across the room in pain. Anakin twisted around as Palpatine pulled Dooku's lightsaber into his hand and struck down the Count of Sereno. Palpatine looked at Anakin and then said to him that he had so much potential. Anakin raised his blade as he looked at Sidious. He was furious that Kanan had been hurt, but he didn't know what to do. Palpatine had been his instructor for so long, a friend for so long, and was it just to groom him after all? Palpatine said that Anakin had so much power and he could become so much more. All he had to do was join him. The war would end, his wife would be his wife. He would no longer be a slave to the Jedi and would be more powerful than any Jedi the galaxy had ever seen. Everything he ever wanted. Anakin looked at Sidious as he stepped back slowly. Palpatine held the crimson blade in his hand, pleading with Anakin to join him. Skywalker raised his blade as Palpatine asked if Skywalker was going to kill him. Anakin responded, telling Palpatine that he certainly would like to, as he looked to his side. While conceptually what Palpatine said sounded great, if it got Dooku killed, then it wasn't worth his time. Anakin heard stories of Master Dooku, mostly from Jocasta Nu. He knew how wise Dooku was, and if Palpatine would just betray him, then there was no reason to join the Sith Lord, because he would do the same to him. Palpatine let out an evil-sounding, "So be it." Even if Skywalker didn't join him, he could still make the plan work. He could kill the 3 Jedi and simply lie his way out of it. All the same as he always did. No biggie for Palpatine. Anakin swung forward and Palpatine blocked with lightning speed. Anakin and Sidious engaged in combat as their lightsabers began to clash up against each other. Kanan looked up, watching the flawless form of the Sith Lord. Anakin too was incredible, matching the speed as he was on a backpedal. Sidious wasn't giving it his all. He still wanted Skywalker to join him. Kanan looked over and saw Kenobi regaining his strength. Kanan got up, a bit shaken after taking electricity to the face, and as he moved forward, igniting his lightsaber once again. Sidious cackled as he used his full strength to push Anakin backwards, and then turned towards Kanan, who pushed an offensive. Palpatine was quick as he blocked 2 swings from Anakin's student before he landed a strict parry. Palpatine shoved his blade forward as he moved his blade side to side. 1, 2, 3-point saber combo, and Dooku's blade was sticking through Kanan as he looked into the piercing yellow eyes of Palpatine. Anakin yelled out, using the Force to throw Palpatine from his feet. Anakin ran forward as Kanan slowly fell to the ground. Anakin heard another lightsaber ignite as Obi-Wan moved in unison with his student. Anakin and Obi-Wan came together as they clashed with Palpatine. The Master of Defense and the Chosen One were brothers again, as they tossed and turned around the room. Anakin spun around, using every single move he could to get to Sidious. The Dark Lord shoved Obi-Wan off balance, enough to strike him with electricity, making Obi-Wan cry out in agony. Anakin slashed forward as anger got the best of him as he raged on, throwing every heavy strike he could at Sidious. Obi-Wan tumbled to the ground as he looked up, watching darkness rise in Anakin. When Anakin turned on the dark side, he was much more powerful, but he wasn't cautious. His patience vanished, and Obi-Wan couldn't handle the idea of Anakin being struck down in impatience. Obi-Wan got to his feet as he looked up. Anakin cracked down on Dooku's blade, cutting the handle into pieces and cutting through Palpatine's wrist. Anakin didn't stop there as he reached out with the Force and dragged Palpatine off of his feet towards him with his metallic hand and tightened the grip around Palpatine's neck, cracking bone beneath steel, before using his lightsaber and gutting the Sith Lord as he held him above the ground. Obi-Wan looked at Anakin in fear of what he could truly become, before he turned around and ran back towards his student. Anakin grabbed Kanan, who was coughing weakly. Anakin apologized profusely. Kanan grabbed his master's hand and told him that he had no need to apologize. Anakin looked down with tears swelling in his eyes. Across the room, Kenobi making sure that Sidious was truly dead. Kanan thanked Anakin for everything. Anakin said that he had failed him though, to which Kanan told his master that he gave him the thrill of a lifetime. Kanan coughed up some more before telling his master that it had always been his dream to be Anakin's student, and he got to live out his dream for the last 3 years, and that was the greatest part of his journey. Kanan slowly fell limp in Anakin's arms, as Anakin tried calling him, calling out Kanan's name before slipping into calling out Caleb's name, but the response died out, and the weight of Kanan became heavier than it was before. The breathing stopped, and he was silenced. Anakin started crying as his student died in his hands. Obi-Wan came over and put his hand on Anakin's back, trying to comfort his student. The ship began to rattle moments later. The Republic assumed everything was dealt with on the ship, and now saw it as a target, as it began to open fire on the capital ship. Obi-Wan helped Anakin get up, and told them that they needed to get out of here. The 2 Jedi made a valiant escape from the ship. Obi-Wan grabbed Kanan's very unique lightsaber and attached it to his belt, so that Anakin could always have it. The 2 Jedi would have the fortune of escaping back to Coruscant as General Grievous retreated into deep space towards Utapau. When the Jedi returned, they informed the Senate, when they returned, that Palpatine had been executed by the Separatists, and they killed Dooku in the process. Without Sidious, the Republic had no knowledge of where in the Outer Rim General Grievous had gone. Anakin and Obi-Wan would specifically inform the Jedi High Council that Palpatine was the Sith Lord that they had been looking for, and they killed him on the Invisible Hand, leaving Darth Maul as the last Sith in the galaxy. Obi-Wan told the council that Maul was still located on Mandalore, and they had no knowledge of where General Grievous had disappeared to. Anakin did get a chance to see Padme because right after they informed the High Council, they were approved for an invasion of Mandalore, and sent Obi-Wan and Anakin out there, while dispatching a larger port of the Coruscant Defense Fleet into the Outer Rim to find General Grievous. The High Council was spread thin. Ki-Adi-Mundi was on Mykeeto, Yoda was being sent to Kashyyyk, and Kenobi was on Mandalore. The war would continue for a couple more weeks, before the Republic would locate General Grievous on Utapau, where Plo Koon and Mace Windu would be sent. Kenobi and Skywalker had finished up their siege of Mandalore. Having it take a couple of weeks was a result of avoiding civilian casualties. Maul was killed in combat, making Obi-Wan technically the Mandalore. Because Bo couldn't simply take the dark saber, Obi-Wan laid it to rest with Satine's grave, so that Mandalore could unite without a magic sword. Kenobi believed they would be better off without it. On another note, the Clone Wars came to a rapid end when the Wolf Pack and 187th Legion came down on Utapau with the sole intention of finding and destroying General Grievous, which inevitably was the absolute success for the two Jedi Masters dispatched to Utapau. The war came to a quick resolve as the Senate worked hard to replace the Chancellor. Anakin would come to find out about the births of both of his children when he returned from the siege of Mandalore, though Anakin was confused when Padme didn't address them by any names. Padme informed him that she refused to name them until he came back, believing it was only fair if he could name their children with her together, in which the boy was named Luke and the girl was named Leia. Anakin would step down from the Jedi Order and end his service for the Grand Army of the Republic, after the war was won, of course. The death of his student took everything out of him and he no longer felt a need to be a Jedi. But he was able to find some semblance of peace on Naboo when he went there with his wife and two children to raise them in peace. Of course, nightmares would plague Anakin from the war, but those nightmares would come and go. His friendship with Obi-Wan would never disappear, as the two of them would stay close after Anakin left the Order. The galaxy itself would work on repair. The Clone Wars left a stain on the galaxy, but without the rise of an emperor, the galaxy had a reasonable chance to save itself from the worst outcome possible. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is our story. Again, special thanks to Benjamin Wells, Jonathan, Pimp Daddy Bane, Darth, Cheesy Apollo, Madman Stews, Anakin 003, Lemon Knight, Flynn Van Cease, and Lord Deadwing for supporting the channel. Hit 2,000 likes on this video if you want to see what comes next. I don't know what it is, but it is. If you want to see a what if, let me know below. Whatever comes, but I'll do crossovers. Check out the Twitch community, Discord, Patreon, and podcast. If you want to support me in other ways, go check out these awesome channels. I'm going to be uploading soon there, very, very soon. In terms of the podcast, that is going to be doing stories again from what we've already uploaded, and then we'll be doing interview segments every other week. Also, for those of you that are interested, I have Part of the Empire and the Broken One merch, and another note. There is the full season 1 of what is going to become a new show soon, a mini-series for me. Episode 1 is called Dawn, Episode 2 is called Lines Drawn, Episode 3 Choices Part 1, Episode 4 Choices Part 2, Episode 5 Rookie Recon, and Episode 6 Trials of the Chosen One. That is going to be coming out very soon. I have to finish writing the entire thing. I'm going to be writing the entire thing as a one, and if you guys like that, we'll do the continuation of Season 1 or do a Season 2, whatever works there. Anyways, let's talk about our story after I just rambled to you for so many things that are coming out. Anyways, so the only reason Anakin wins is because Kanan gets shanked. I just want to address that immediately, because I think Palpatine at this state is going to beat Anakin. I don't think Anakin's really reached that level where he could take on Palpatine one-on-one. I think in a case where Palpatine was playing light, yes, but at this point I don't think Palpatine was playing light. And the only reason that Anakin really won was because Kanan died. And so what was really fun about this was kind of the same thing that happened with Daisha in the What If Anakin Had Another Student After Ahsoka. And that was a lot of fun for me to do. The Daisha story was a lot of fun because I got to build this relationship between Anakin and another character, and honestly I think you guys should be expecting a lot more of these stories coming, because it's a lot of fun establishing a bond between Anakin and a student rather than Anakin and a master, because we've done so many Anakin and a master stories that having Anakin with a student, a new student, is really interesting, especially since Ahsoka is such a unique case for a Jedi. You know, she's repugnant, she's rambunctious, she's malignant, she's got such a personality, she's so sassy, and she just, like, in the early stages of the Clone Wars, she just pisses off Anakin so much. And so having a different dynamic with every other like student would be really interesting. And so that's why I started this one off after the Battle of Christophsis, or otherwise after the Clone Wars movie, because I really wanted you guys to have an idea of like a difference of Jedi student with Anakin. I really didn't want to redo the whole Clone Wars movie either. I feel like that's a bad place to set up a bond, because that movie is kind of disliked by people, but it's also kind of liked. It's kind of weird reputation in the Star Wars community. But I figured starting the story after that event would have so much more of an impact on the story itself, and so that's where I went. And then, you know, throughout the writing process for the story, which, I mean, I wrote this right after writing The Earth Part 5, also Part 6 is coming soon. And so, like, I had a lot of fun with this, and it was hard for me to pick which Clone Wars stories to focus on, because that's the real cool thing about doing a story with a Padawan for Anakin, is that there's so many stories with Anakin and Ahsoka in the Clone Wars that, like, I got to pick and choose which ones I wanted to focus on. For example, you know, Caleb isn't going to be chasing down Cad Bane in Holocron Heist. That's just not happening. He's not chasing down Cad Bane. You know, Ahsoka's like, no, I got him. Like, if Anakin's like, don't do that, that's a dumb idea, he's gonna get you, Caleb would be like, oh yeah, you're probably right. And the reason I say there's so much inspiration for Caleb to want to be Anakin's student is based on how people look at Anakin. You see that from Reva in the Kenobi show. You see that from Caleb in Tales of the Jedi, the way he kind of looks at Anakin and Ahsoka when they first start interacting. It's the second episode of Tales of the Jedi. And so I based a lot of that emotion off of how Anakin's really perceived from within the Order, and how a Padawan's going to look up to him. The same thing I kind of did with Daisha, but in a different aspect, especially with someone like Caleb, who's already an established character. With Kanan, the name I gave him, I really wanted to give him the name Kanan because I thought that'd be a cool tie to Rebels. And so the meaning for Kanan has a couple different meanings in our own languages, not in English, but like in Turkish and I think it was Indian. And so, like, Indian, it means like forest or like green, I believe. And then in Turkish, it's like quiver of arrows. So I changed it to quiver of blasters to make it like kind of fit in with Star Wars continuity. But, you know, I wanted to create that little like addition to the story just so you guys could feel like it was more entrenched in the Star Wars universe. Something I kind of did with Andrillion in the What If Qui-Gon Trained Anakin video, which, you know, that was a fun video for me to include a whole another planet into. And so, you know, I think the story was a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun with the story, so I really hope you enjoyed it. Much longer story, but it kind of garnered a longer story because of building a bond between two people that you don't see interact. I mean, even the way Kanan talks about Anakin in the Star Wars Rebels, that tells you everything you need to know. Like, this dude saw Anakin as a hero. Like, Anakin was portrayed as a hero, and so he's gonna look up to him, even though he doesn't know he became Darth Vader. And that's like the crazy thing about it, you know, about how Kanan interprets Anakin in Rebels. Is like, he's like, oh yeah, this is like the greatest Jedi of all time, and it's like, oh yeah, he's also Darth Vader, by the way, but he doesn't know that. So anyways, I hope you all enjoyed. If you did, smash that like button. Got more videos coming out for you guys this week, as always. I love you all, spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.